Good evening, my friends. Let us continue with our lesson. And today I'm going to discuss with you a short reflection on the speech given by Kofi Annan, the former Secretary General of the United Nations. And he provided us a very important and a very simple and yet very significant speech that will challenge our imagination, especially that if we are thinking of if we are especially if we are thinking of the subject of human rights and universal values. And last meeting, we made mention of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as the source of our first generation of rights. And the UDHR, as we know it, is a compendium or a collection or the culmination of the many things that had happened in the past, especially these are connected with history, and especially with the line of thought in the age of enlightenment and the realization of the rights of man or the rights of the human person and also the international humanitarian law. And we consider the UDHR or the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as a statement of policy that perhaps will help us guide and craft the future, determine the future of our society and of the world in general. And it is important that as we discuss the values of human rights, that we think of it from the point of view not only of the individual person, but from the different layers of society. So beginning from the individual person, interpersonal relationship, the relationship of people within communities, and also in international relations. And you might want also to include the environment and even the world beyond or the esoteric aspect of human existence. So allow me now to begin my sharing of my own personal reflection on the speech of Kofi Annan. And perhaps from this, we can derive some important insights that will help us appreciate the meaning of the universality of human rights. So allow me to share my screen. Okay, so give me some time to do this. Okay, and I'm trying to look into my uh, okay. So I'm sorry, I'm having difficulty with my difficulty with my presentation. Okay. So I hope that this is already visible to everyone. So do we need universal values? A reflection on the speech of Kofi Annan. And do we still have universal values? And I think when Kofi Annan gave this speech, he was not doubting the validity of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights or the validity of universal values, but rather his purpose was to uh, the purpose of his speech was to challenge our thoughts, to challenge our imaginations, to make us more critical of the current situations that we are in the world today. That's why, if you are not familiar, Kofi Annan was the former Secretary General of the United Nations. And it is not unusual that he will be asking these questions, not because he was doubting the efficacy of the United Nations, but rather he was challenging our imaginations, and he was is trying to bring about some positive ideas that will help us in trying to appreciate these values and how we can make these values and as a reality. Okay. Now, what is the significance of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights? In December 10 of 1948, the United Nations um, accepted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and this has important important significance for our country and for our world today. The first one is that these are the expressions of a vision rather than a description of reality. Remember that when the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was crafted, when it was created, the countries and people, the countries of there were several member countries who acceded to this declaration, who were themselves deficient in the practice of human rights. Especially, there were some countries who were totalitarian and who were oppressing their people. And just to take as an example, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, where there was the prevalence of totalitarianism, especially during the time of Joseph Stalin. And, that's why we can say that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights were an expression of a vision rather than of a reality. But the fact that it was established as a vision is the first step in order to make these things become a reality. So today they are more realized today than they were before. So today there is a lot of improvement. There is a lot of progress in the practice of human rights, and we see that in the way things are done, especially the kind of treaties that we have today. And if we look in and if we trace the generation of human rights, we see a lot of development than today. And the ideals of our founders were not realized as before, but they are not fully realized. So they are not yet fully realized today because there are so many challenges. And the values of human rights have been accepted in the legal frameworks of most countries. You will find out that in the constitutions of many countries, including our country, there is always the section of the Bill of Rights. In other words, the principles of human rights are already embedded in our constitution, not only in our constitution, but in the constitutions of other countries as well. And these are the significance of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, wherein it has become the universal values for the world that we live today. But my dear friends, our world today is characterized as a highly globalized world. So we have now the idea or the concept or the process known as globalization. So globalization, in short, means the increased interaction and integration of the world today. And today we are closer than we were yesterday, we were before. That's why I don't know, is that McLuhan who said that the world today is now a global, we are now living in a global village, meaning to say that because of the increased technology in communications and travel, people today are we seem to be living like in a village where we know each other, we can communicate each other. So just compare the information technology that we have today compared 2 decades ago, wherein people can communicate wherever we are, we can communicate. And we have even seen that during the pandemic, we were able to perform our task and work even from a distance. And we can communicate easily with other people. And the sharing and the facilitation of ideas are becoming more efficient. That's why this is now the process of globalization. And in this process of globalization, we realize that we can no longer isolate ourselves or insulate ourselves from world events, because whatever we do, whatever is decided upon, will certainly affect the others. And there are many examples to this, especially if we remember in 2008, the financial crisis in the US, how it reverberated in Korea, Japan, and in Southeast Asia. And also, recently, for example, the war in Ukraine and the conflict between the Russia and the European Union, or NATO as it is creating a chain of events, like, for example. And of course we cannot uh, the difficulties that we have today, economic difficulties today, of course, it cannot be traced to that 100% to that the Russian war in Ukraine, but rather it is contributory to the existing difficulties that we have, especially because of the COVID-19, and it resulted into economic recession and the prevalence of inflation. And this inflation is felt not only in our country, but it is also experienced anywhere in the world today. So as society becomes more integrated, the more that we need values to bind us. A society exists, a community exists because of the common values that they share with each other. And this is now the more that we need the Universal Declaration of Human Rights to guide our actions. And um, but today, the globalization that we have is in jeopardy. And globalization has brought opportunities as well as stresses. Stresses came about because we are not able to manage the values that we profess to observe. So what kind of example can we give to this? um, uh, Everyone, for example, in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it is said that everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself and of his family, including food, clothing, housing, medical care, and necessary social services. But this was never realized because of the extreme poverties in some countries, and we saw the opposite of this. And we see that despite of this value of equality, of an adequate standard of living for everyone, enshrined in our constitution, enshrined in our legal frameworks as a right, and yet there are many people, there are many families, there are many communities that are suffering because of poverty, because of discrimination, and because of the lack of equality among people. And we see, especially in international relations, we could see the wedge between the global north and the global south. And when we speak of the global north and the global south, we are speaking of a political metaphor, of a socio-political metaphor. When we speak of the north, we are speaking of the advanced and wealthy countries. And then when we speak of the south, we are talking about of the developing countries, the developing countries, and the countries that are poor, and because they are disadvantaged because of globalization. So, in other words, there are many social scientists today who says that this globalization has brought a wedge between the rich and the poor, and it is only the enlargement of the capitalist system characterized by inequality. Okay. So in what sense does globalization drive a wedge between people? So you see, some people, when they experience oppression, when they experience discrimination, the tendency is to preserve themselves. You know, people have this tendency of self-preservation, and under the threat of oppression, of inequality, of discrimination, there is a tendency to take refuge in one's tradition or in one's community, and consider this community as absolute, and then later on, this will emerge as a potential problem, as a source of tension in the relationship of among peoples. And especially sometimes, you know, that sometimes conflict, terrorism, and all these kinds of things are being wedged and done in the name of one's own country, one's own religion, one's own ideology. And this is now the challenge to globalization. So we ask the question, has globalization bring about the realization of our universal values, or has globalization brought us into the brink of a clash of civilization? So how can we benefit from the universal values that we have? So Kofi Annan is challenging us that there is a need for us to reassert our universal values, especially in places where respect for freedom, individual freedom, is challenged because of authoritarianism. Then we need to think rigorously of what do we mean by these universal values. What is what is the really the meaning of these universal values, and how can we benefit from this? And third is the validity of our universal values should not be judged by how we implement them, but rather the validity of the universal values should be judged according to its intrinsic value, not because in not because of how other people are doing it. For example, what example can I give? For example, um, like for example, you cannot you cannot make the actions of the Christian crusaders as a universal value or characteristics of all Christians, because we cannot be responsible for the actions of others. Or especially the conflict in the Middle East, especially how the state of Israel is acting, how the Palestinian groups are reacting. It is not fair that we should be generalizing all these actions to mean to apply to everyone, but rather, despite of all of this, everyone is entitled to their own rights. For example, the Israeli people have the right to live in peace and security. And also at the same time, the Palestinian people also have the right to have their own country, and to be independent, and to determine their future. Those are just some of the few examples that I can explain to you. Then we must respect the rights of people to identify themselves. So this involves the right to self-determination and a clear understanding of what our obligation in relation to our rights. That's why we have to show our sense of obligation. It's like in business, you have the so-called corporate responsibility. Then also an emphasis on tolerance and dialogue are important. And societies that rely heavily on tradition must realize that they will survive best if they are open to new ideas and are flexible. Because rigidity, in a sense, can provide us with a false hope, a false security, but in the end, it will result to our own breakup and um, the diminishing of all the things that we have been fighting for. And uh, the universal values, finally, we need to they need to be carefully thought through. They need to be defended. They need to be strengthened, and we need to find within ourselves the will to live by the values we proclaim in our private lives, in our local and national societies, and in the world. That's why it calls for a matured mind, a matured perception of what the rights is. And my friend, the universal values is the key to our happiness. It is the key to peace and security, of which the United Nations has been founded, and whose purpose is to preserve peace and security. So thank you, my friends, for this short presentation, and I hope that you will continue to read the assignment that I give you, and then we can have a better discussion next time in our class.